Everyone says Knoxville is affordable, but is it really? Today, I'm breaking down the ins and outs of the cost of living in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're talking about things like housing, groceries, transportation, all of the things that come up that affect your bottom line and your cost of living in a city. Also, you can decide if moving to Knoxville in 2025 makes sense for you. What's up, everybody? Cole Lyles here with Realty Executives in Knoxville, Tennessee. Let's start with housing, because that's like the biggest chunk of change, right? That's the biggest thing most of us spend money on is our shelter. So what is the cost of housing in Knoxville, Tennessee? Well, there's two sides to the equation. There's people who buy, there's people who rent. Nothing wrong with either one. It's just different goals, different phases of life, different strategies, things like that. So in our MLS in October, the median sale price of a home was $369. And that's a little bit down from our September number of $380, which is not surprising. We have sort of seasonality that affects some of that and some of the demand, things like that. And in Knox County specifically, the median price for October was $380,000, was kind of right middle of the road. And those numbers span everything from $150,000 up to $2 or $3 million. We have a very wide range of housing available here. Also, before we get going too much farther, I do want to say, I'm going to use a lot of numbers both from data and from my personal experience, but your mileage may vary. Everyone has different circumstances, different needs, and you may be in a position where your cost of living is much lower or much higher than this. Feel free to get in touch. I'm happy to give you kind of a more personalized idea of what it's going to be based on your situation. Now, if you're looking to rent, I would expect if you're renting a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot house, I would expect to pay somewhere around $1,600 a month, depending on which part of town you're in. Now, if you're very specifically wanting to be in West Knoxville and some of the more desirable school districts and some of the school districts that people seem to enjoy, then you're going to maybe be paying a little bit more. I would expect you to be paying somewhere closer to $2,000, maybe $2,500, somewhere in that range. But again, it really depends on the part of town you're in, the specific type of home you're looking for. Attached housing is generally going to be a little bit cheaper than separated housing. And if you're looking for amenities, things like that, it's just going to look very different based on what you need. But if you're cool with wherever in Knoxville, kind of just East Tennessee, $1,600 a month for a 3-bed, 2-bath is a fairly common number. And then that goes down usually as you get into smaller places. If you're looking to buy new construction, that's going to affect your cost structure as well and what you're paying. And there's a couple of reasons for that. New construction is either the same price or sometimes a little bit cheaper per square foot than homes that are being resold. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The inventory crunch and some of the lock-in effect that we've heard about. There was a very low turnover of homes. So when you have lower supply, prices go up because of supply and demand, right? So new construction is something that we've seen a lot of developers working on, a lot of builders working on generating more of here in Knoxville. And something they can do that helps a lot of buyers for new construction is they can offer buy downs, they can offer closing costs, things that will affect your overall cost of housing pretty significantly in a way that some just typical sellers can't. So, depending on the specific part of town you're looking in, the type of new construction you're looking for, you may be in a position where your housing costs can go down a little bit compared to buying a comparable home that's a resale home. And new construction is popping up all over Knoxville. It's concentrated in places like Hardin Valley, Carnes, some in East Knoxville. There's a little bit of infill stuff on the north side as well. So new construction is all over the map. A lot of it is determining what you want in a home. If you want a home that's older, built a certain way, then that's what we're going to look for. And if you want a home where you don't have to worry about the water heater for a while and you don't want to worry about the roof for a couple of years, then a new construction may be the way to go for you. So we'll talk about kind of the strategy for you, but overall, new construction and resale homes in Knoxville are fairly similar in terms of pricing. There's not a significant difference in those two. And that kind of brings me to the next thing. Location is really a big factor in determining your cost of housing. For instance, if you were just dead set on living next to Farragut Elementary School, then you're going to pay a lot more money. To the order of like maybe $150,000, $200,000 more for a very similar house in a different part of town. I remember I toured a house the other day that I'd sold a fairly similar home, and in fact, a nearly identical home in terms of floor plan. I had sold one up in Northeast Knoxville, and the one I was touring was in West Knoxville, in Farragut specifically. And The homes were relatively similar age, relatively similar condition. The one that I sold went for maybe around 550, somewhere in that range. And the one that was for sale here was for sale for 800. So that's a $250,000 increase in the pricing. Now, it was a fairly large home. There's a touch more square footage, but it was otherwise fairly similar. So it's not exactly apples to apples, but just to give you an idea of the increase of costs and the increase of what your cost of living would be in a place like Farragut versus a place like Northeast Knoxville or South Knoxville, something like that. It's real. So getting to know the neighborhoods is really important. That's kind of the shelter piece. The other big part of shelter is obviously utilities. I mean, what good is a house if you don't have the lights on, right? So what do utilities cost in Knoxville? In general, they're roughly on par with the average. I mean, they're not considerably more or less expensive here. I mean, I own a 1,500 square foot house, 3-bed, 3-bath. I have 2 kids and a wife, and we live here together, and it's not very well insulated. And there's a lot of things that, because it was built in 1904, it's super old, it's a live and flip, it's a lot of things. I'm in the middle of a lot of things right now. But in general, I expect to pay somewhere around $350 a month for electricity, water, sewer, trash is included because I live in the city, fire service, some of the other things that come around, but I usually tell people, hey, $350 to $400. Most of the time, if you're buying an efficient home, it's going to be less than that. I tend to be a fan of preparing for the worst and then being surprised when good things happen and your bill's a little lower. Internet is also something that is fairly affordable here. You can pay $60 a month to KUB for their fiber. It's a gig up, gig down. It's a great service. It's what we have. There's also people like Xfinity, AT&T, WOW has a footprint here. All of them are going to cost somewhere around the same, somewhere in that $60 to $100 a month. So if you're working remotely, you need a specific connection. I would recommend looking in a place where KUB has fiber. It's very solid, it's very, very sturdy connection. So it's usually good for people who are in those remote jobs. Now let's talk about groceries and kind of the daily living things. Groceries around here, again, are not considerably more expensive than any other part of town or any other part of the state. They are generally a little less expensive maybe than if you're coming from the Pacific Northwest or the West Coast or the Northeast. I think generally groceries are a touch cheaper here, maybe 5%. It's not significant, but it adds up. Something that is weird about Knoxville and Tennessee for some people, I mentioned this in other videos, we do have a sales tax. As of this recording, Knox City just declined to raise their taxes from 9.25% to 9.75% on sales. So that's where a lot of our state and city revenue comes from, is sales taxes. So if you see the carton of eggs says it's $2 at the thing, but when you go up and buy it, it's going to be a little bit higher. It's going to be 9.25% higher than that because we have a sales tax. So that will increase your grocery costs just a little bit, but on the whole, it's not a significant portion of the grocery bill. We're as affected as anybody by the rising and falling costs of groceries. And I know that's been, here in 2025, that's been a conversation, right? The cost of eggs, cost of milk, things like that. We do have a great farmer's market. So if cost is not a big factor to you, you want local, we have very, very excellent selections for that. But in general, just for reference, again, 2 kids and a wife, fairly small children. So they're mostly eating like yogurt and peanut butter. We're spending about $125 a week on groceries, and that's not rice and beans. We could scale that down if we were in a position where we needed to. Scale up, scale down. We also have a ton of grocery stores. If you're Aldi people and you love the Aldi deals, we've got options. We have plenty of Aldis around town. We have Trader Joe's, Publix, Kroger, Walmart. Basically anywhere you like to shop, we've got it. And your mileage may vary depending on what you buy, where you buy it, things like that. Now, if you're going out to eat, which Knoxville has a great food scene, we just had 2 restaurants in the city end up on the Michelin Southern Guide, which is amazing. We're so excited for them. JC Holdway and Potchkey Deli, 2 awesome spots. We also have one regional, the restaurant at RT Lodge down in Maryville. They got listed as well. So we have incredible food options here. Some of the best food in the region is down here in Knoxville. If you want to go out to eat, you just want to go out for a casual, kind of a casual dinner, I would expect to pay $15 to $20 a plate. There's plenty of happy hours that are cheaper, and there's plenty of places that are more than that, but you're averaging about 15 to 20 bucks a plate. That's usually going to get you right in line with your expectations. Now, let's talk a little bit more in depth about taxes and fees, just some of the taxes that come from living in Tennessee. And this is one of the areas where Tennessee shines on the national stage. We're a low to no tax state, very tax averse state, and that plays itself out in 1,000 different ways and has a ton of different ramifications, good and bad, but it's the reality. So one of the things that's true, I mentioned that sales tax, it's 9.25% in Knoxville and Knox County. Surrounding counties, it can go as high as 9.75%. And a number of surrounding counties have gone up there. So if you're looking in the surrounding counties and taxes are of great import to you, look it up. But that's about half a percentage point on the differences. The state cap, no county in Tennessee, no city in Tennessee is allowed to have a sales tax higher than 9.75%. 7% of that tax goes to the state, and the additional goes into the city or the county or whatever municipality levied that. And then we also have property tax, which everyone has property taxes. Ours are considerably lower than a lot of major metros in the area, and then nationally and where people tend to move from. But the way it works in Knox County, at least, and every county is a little different, but in Knox County, the way it works is the property assessor comes by, I believe it's every 2 years now, it used to be 4, and assesses a new value of your property. They do like a basic, we think it would appraise for this. And then they take 20% of that amount, that's your assessed value. Let me look up the numbers here because I don't want to tell you incorrectly. So they take that assessed value and then they put a tax on it. So in Knoxville, it's $2.16 per $100 of assessed value. And then in the county, it's $1.55 per $100 of assessed value. So you add those together in the city, it's roughly 4% of the assessed value. In the county, it's roughly 1.5% of the assessed value. And what that translates to, for example, a $400,000 home, you're probably looking at a $2,800 a year in property tax, so maybe $3,000, something like that. And it depends on the condition, like the location, and kind of, again, that's going to affect your value, which will then affect your assessed value, which will then affect your property tax. And all of this is public record. We never have to be surprised by property taxes. So I'll always let you know what that's going to look like, and your lender will help you with that too if you choose to finance a portion of it. So whatever it is, you're going to know what it is, but I can almost bet it's going to be less than wherever you're coming from. So let's look at things like healthcare and insurance and other miscellaneous costs, just some of the other things that come up. If you're a person who's maybe medically complex and needs access to hospitals, things like that, or you just want to live close to a hospital, we've got them. We have a ton in Knoxville. And in East Tennessee, we have some regional hospitals that can help support if you prefer to live in some of those outer counties. And healthcare costs in Knoxville are roughly on par with the national average. The medicine is kind of a black box in terms of the cost structure in the US. We don't have very transparent pricing. So our healthcare premiums here are roughly similar to what you're seeing nationally. Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, and Humana are the largest insurance providers in Tennessee, and most people accept most of those plans. So that would be a good question for your employer, but generally you should expect healthcare to be roughly similar to what it is wherever you're coming from. Car insurance is, again, similar to the national average. Whatever you're paying for car insurance, we don't have any additional taxes and fees on top of car insurance. And our registration, our wheel tax, things like that in Knox County, I believe somewhere around $65 a year to register your car and keep it running. We don't have emissions testing. So if you're coming from a place like Georgia or California where there's routine emissions testing, we don't have that. You don't have to pay those fees. So that will knock off a little bit of your cost, but in general, owning and running a car is going to cost the same as wherever you are, minus some of those additional taxes and fees that sometimes get tacked on in other places. Home insurance here, the average is somewhere around $2,400 a year. So, and that is, I believe, a little bit less than what is national, but again, your mileage may vary. If you choose to buy a place right next to a creek or next to a river, you're going to have some flood premiums and you're going to have some stuff that comes up. But as a part of the purchase, process, we're looking into insurance costs. You get time to decide if the insurance premiums are going to make sense for you. So long story short, the insurance is not too different. It's maybe a little cheaper than wherever you're coming from, especially if you're coming from a place like Florida or a place like California with the wildfires. There's a ton of things that don't happen here that make your insurance premiums maybe a little more competitive than some other places in the country. So where does Knoxville sit on the national scale? I've said a couple times, oh, it's a little bit less than here or there. Knoxville, on average, based on the sources I've seen, our Chamber of Commerce and a couple of other people have put this out there as well. Knoxville's around 13.6% or 14% lower than the national average. And what that means is your dollar in California, or your dollar in the national average is going to be worth $1.14 here. It's going to go just a little bit farther in Knoxville. Now, that comes with some trade-offs. So one thing that's true in Knoxville as well, our median income per household is a little bit less than the national average, I think. I don't know exactly what the relationship is, but in Knoxville, in the Knoxville metropolitan statistical area, which is kind of our outer lying counties, minus Sevier County and one other over there, I think, the median income for two people, I think, is somewhere around $76,000. I say 75, just because I can't remember if it's 74 or 76, $75,000. And that is generally a little bit lower than the national average, which I think is somewhere around 80, but not by much. So the average income for two people in Knoxville, in the Knoxville metropolitan statistical area, I think this is from the last census data that we have, is around $76,000. So I think it's $75,000, which is not nothing. I mean, that is a good income, but that may be less than what you're used to making where you're coming from. So what we've seen a lot of is people bringing remote jobs to East Tennessee and to Knoxville, maintaining that income while letting their dollars go a lot farther here. And if you're coming from a very high cost of living state, that 14% is likely going to look a little bit higher than 14%, because that's a national average. That's the aggregate of all those other places. So in general, it's going to depend somewhat on where you're coming from. We're not the cheapest city in town. It's not like you're going to come here and buy a gallon of milk for 30 cents and a nickel for a comic book. It's nothing like that. But in general, things just cost a little bit less. But when you add those savings up on the aggregate, it ends up being savings for people. I mean, a significant difference in their life. And people, I know people who've moved here just to free up cash in their life because it's a great place to live. And they also suddenly are making $10,000 more a year, or at least not spending $10,000 a year, that they can then go and try and achieve their goals with. And I don't know about you, but for me, every penny counts, right? Every little bit helps. One other cost in Knoxville that doesn't fit neatly in some of these other lists, daycare. Daycare is not cheap here. We have I would consider it a shortage of daycare workers and daycare facilities in Knoxville. And I think that's a national problem. That's not something unique to Knoxville, but it's something we're feeling here. So if you have young children like I do, I've got 2 kids in daycare, it is the single largest line item in my budget. I mean, I would expect to pay somewhere around $250 to $300 a week per kid in daycare costs. And that's usually going to include a drive of some kind. So daycare is something that it's a conversation, right? If you have young children, I would call around to some daycares around and see what the wait lists look like, and see what kind of, what the tuition fees are and what their availability is. Make sure that's in line with your life and the things that you need to do here. And if you have a partner who's willing to stay home, or if you're the stay-at-home person, awesome. Don't sweat that. Take that out of your budget. But if both people in the home work, or if you're a single parent, or whatever your situation is, if you need daycare support and you're planning on moving here, get ahead of that. Go ahead and start calling around. Let me know if you need suggestions or recommendations, whatever. I can tell you all the places I've called to try and get a daycare spot for our 2 kids, and we can go from there. Here's the truth. Knoxville is affordable, but it's getting less so every single year. Knoxville and the surrounding counties are very popular inbound spots. People move here all the time. And with that increase in demand, usually creates an increase in pricing. Timing matters. Where you move specifically in Knoxville does matter for these things. So it's important to have boots on the ground and local expertise who can help you make that decision in the way that best fits your family, you, whatever your goals are. And if you want to figure out how far your budget will take you here, let me know. There's a link in the description below. Jump in there, get on my calendar. Let's talk about what you want, what you need, and what you're looking for. And I can tell you how far your dollar will stretch here in Knoxville. If you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe. I try to put things up every week. I'm in the middle of a transition with where I'm shooting these things. You can see the junk in the back here. That won't be here forever. But be sure to subscribe. There's new stuff going up every single week. We're talking about Knoxville, moving to Knoxville, living in East Tennessee. Again, if you're ready to make a move, schedule a relocation consult in the description below. And until next time, thanks for watching.